the path of Raga Bhakti, which involves following in the footsteps of the gopis and so forth. So it is very specific, and in a particular feature of ultimate reality, Krishna Lila. We will consider it the topmost feature or the fullest experience, the highest experience in transcendence, but all the experiences in transcendence are thought to be the highest by those who have attained whatever particular destination within transcendence they have attained relative to their destiny and the method pursued, of which there are different methods and different destinies. That doesn't mean to say that someone in another tradition can't have some semblance of an experience of that, but to actually enter in there, if you will, I believe our teaching on that is it requires a very specific focus and specific steps. Now we have to be careful at the same time that the specific steps that we're talking about are more than just details. Some people within Gaudiya Vaishnavism put more emphasis on esoteric details than on the principle and get lost in a Kanishtadikari notion that Bhaktivinoda Thakur refers to as Bharabahi, those who, rather than being Saragrahi, essence seekers, they carry a Bharabahi, means they carry a heavy burden of identification with details and externals that they misconstrue to be principles. So we're fortunate to be connected with Bhaktivinoda, who was very deep at the same time universal in his understanding of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, such that if one follows him, one doesn't get caught up by those details of, like, for example, what color cloth you have to wear, or exactly how your tilak is marked, and if it's marked the wrong way, you can't enter there, and so forth. There's nice ideas that they should dress in a certain way and have a certain tilak which identifies you with a particular group, and so on and so forth. But and that may be helpful for meditation, but it can get in the way if it becomes it's thought of as an essential principle, unless you're wearing this color, because it says in Hari Bhakti Vilas or something that the devotee should wear white, and you're wearing saffron, you're not going to enter Goloka. I mean, and people have argued like that foolishly. So it's very specific at the same time, in essence, and we are inclusive enough, as Hinduism is in general, and as Gaudiya Vaishnavism is as well, and perhaps even more so, to include the reality of others who follow different traditions. You refer to the Christian tradition and the Catholicism within that, where there are a number of saints who have given testaments to their experience and so forth, with which we'll find a lot of common ground. In particular, because it's a bhakti tradition, if you will, in the broadest sense of the term. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his universal perspective, if you will. For example, in one of his commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, 4th chapter, Krishna says, Sambhavami yuge yuge, I come again and again, right? Manifest in the world. He has commented, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that this doesn't refer only to India. He appears in other parts of the world relative to the culture there, as the Shaktivesh. I think he gives that example, and teaches the people essentially about Dharma from that cultural perspective. And the reality then that is experienced, well, again, according to the Bhagavatam, the faces of God are asankhya, unlimited, uncountable. Even within Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we have a number of different faces of the Godhead. The face of Krishna is Radhanath, as Sridham Saka, as Jashodanandana, and so forth, and extending, of course, further out into Mathura, Dwarka, Vaikuntha, different faces of God within the parameters or the focus of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And so beyond that, if you will, as well, and I think that the saint that you mentioned, St. John of the Cross, perhaps it was, yeah, he speaks of the dark night of the soul. Now there is something, that we can relate that to. What does that mean to us, the dark night of the soul? And I never studied St. John of the Cross, but I really don't believe that what he is writing about corresponds with the after hours rendezvous of Radha with Krishna. It's a dark night, not always. Sometimes the moon's out full, and she's wearing white, therefore, and covering her body with camphor to blend in with the moonlight, so she won't stand out and be seen. But on the dark nights, she's appropriately wearing a different color. So I don't think that he is referring to a specific, moonless night in the lila that in which Radha is going to secretly rendezvous with Krishna. Krishna is going to secretly rendezvous with Radha when he speaks of the dark night of the soul. That would be a stretch. And again, I haven't studied it, but I'm quite sure that that's not the experience that he is talking about. And if it was, it would be related, obviously, in greater detail. Why would you hold back? I think the dark night of the soul for him is more one of a practice without taste. Practice without taste. Taste, it may take some time for taste to come. The stage of ruchi, for example, when one's practice is driven by the taste, rather than being driven by, well, this is the philosophy, I agree with the philosophy, it makes sense, I've got a little experience, and it encourages me, but my taste for example, chanting is not driven by taste. And sometimes it may be tasteless, and we say that ourselves in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, that just as the tongue afflicted by jaundice will not appreciate the sweet taste of sugarcane, but by taking sugarcane, which cures jaundice, then as one is cured, the tongue will taste the natural sweetness in the sugar. Similarly, as one becomes cured, Cheto Darpanam Arjunam, as the heart becomes cleansed, then one will taste the natural sweetness in Krishna Nam. So I haven't studied St. John of the Cross, but I believe the dark night of the soul, the phrase he uses, refers more to something like that, a deep, abiding conviction in God and commitment that still awaits him to reciprocate in kind and fully show himself. We say a love and separation, longing, if you could go that far, a longing for union. Separation could be, that's taking it a little higher beyond sadhana in bhava. The separation, we enter into union, which is the very overriding characteristic of the unmanifest lila, through separation, which is the overriding characteristic of the manifest prakat lila in this world, where we'll enter. And so from separation comes union, and prior to entering the prakat lila, of course, the longing in Bhava Bhakti is a kind of separation. Going further in Madhurya Rasa, the separation uh, first fully manifests as Purvarag, right? So, yeah, you're even in the lila, you're in love with Krishna, but they haven't been able to express it and hear him express the same and so forth. So anyway, in a broad sense, separation is the kind of the low tide of the ocean of bhakti rasa that enables us to enter, whereas in the high tide, the tidal wave of union, it's not possible to enter. But through separation, we enter into what it means to be embraced by Krishna. That should shatter your bones, and just the thought of it cause your hairs to stand on end. Oh, we talk about it philosophically, but you have to really think about these things and understand what is the depth of that I would be embraced by Krishna. Oh my God. So I believe that we could draw a parallel between either of these two. Just the early sadhakas separation in pursuit of taste, and or the bhava bhakta, an ecstatic, let's say, saint, longing for union with the object of his love. And what is the face of that love that Saint John of the Cross is meditating on and so forth? Well, whatever it is, let's say it's Jesus of Nazareth, the Son, then he should have a corresponding experience in transcendence as well. But it would all of a sudden turn into Krishna, and there's no angels, but there's Gandharvas or something. I mean, it's a little, would be a little shocking. So again, there are many faces of God, and many departments, if you will, of Vaikuntha. And there are also, of course, we would say they're all faces of Krishna. And so it's also reasonable that if you're pursuing a particular face of God, that he might show himself as Krishna in a flash or something like that. I posted something about that from one saint recently. I forget her name. Maybe one of more than one Teresa's.
Teresa of Avalon or something.
Teresa of somewhere, and she had an epiphany, and taking her testimony on its face, and she had a darshan of Krishna, with the gopis. It's true. Now, whether she will enter there, that's her destination, and so on and so forth. Well, that's another thing, and whether maybe she took birth as a family of devotees in West Bengal, in the next lifetime, for all we know. So, there's a connection that we can make, I believe, with all real transcendentalists, real mystics, real saints, and our ideas. And there's some difference, and I think they would desire that difference and affirm it as well. They would be generous enough to affirm, well, yeah, it's Krishna. He is charming. That's your ideal, but our ideal has some similarities, but it's a little different. They wouldn't want us to just turn it all into Krishna lila necessarily, because again, God, it has many faces. So yeah, that's my answer. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Rasa Lila. She's not here today, I don't think, but here's what she asks. She says, does Narada Muni have an eternal place in the intimate pastimes with Sri Krishna in Vrindavan, or is he eternally the transcendental cosmic wanderer?
Just as, thank you for the question, just as Krishna expands himself for different lilas to interact with different devotees and their love by, for example, expanding as Sri Krishna and interacting with Devaki and Vasudeva in Dwarka, in Mathura, and further Dwarkesh Krishna manifesting in Dwarka, interacting with the devotees there. It's thought that similarly, as Krishna goes or expands himself, his immediate entourage goes with him. So let's take, for example, Krishna in Dwarka. The principal queens in Dwarka are Rukmini and Satyabhama. According to Rupa Goswami's drama, Lila-Madhava, Radharani has manifest as Satyabhama, and Chandravali has manifest as Rukmini. In the Vrindavan Lila, Chandravali has a very secondary position, and Radharani is in the forefront. In Dwarka, it's reversed, and Rukmini has the upper hand, if you will, in a sense, and Satyabhama is secondary. But the two, Chandravali and Satyabhama, are thought to be expansions of Chandravali and Radha, respectively. If we look at the Vrindavan Lila, we find that amongst the cowherd friends of Krishna, the one that is most similar to Krishna himself in many respects, the Pitamarta, as he's called in poetic language, is Sridham, and it's not uncommon, or it is common, I should say, for him to defeat Krishna in Yudhavira, in a play of wrestling amongst them. And if one prevails in such matches amongst the boys, then the loser has some price to pay, typically. And the classic example is that Krishna has to carry Sridham on his shoulders. And so when Krishna goes to Dwarka, we find that he rides on the shoulders of Garuda. And Sridham Saka is thought to have expanded into the person of Garuda, according to Sanatana Goswami, in Dwarka, to where the role is reversed. Now he's carrying Krishna. So these are a couple examples, and they're pertinent to your question regarding Narada Muni, because from a tattva point of view, Narada Muni is thought to be the guru, the teacher of Purnamasi and Madhumangal, who come to Vrindavan together to reside there and enter into and fully participate in the lila. But from the Bhava point of view, Jiva Goswami points out that Narada Muni, well, I don't know from the Bhava point of view, but anyway, Narada Muni is a Vaidhi Marg expansion of Madhumangal. Madhumangal in the Lila is a student of Narada. Of course, we enter into his participation in the Lila after his schooling. Him and his grandmother, Purnamasi. But he is the Narada is sometimes called the farcical Brahmin, because he's a Brahmin and a sage, but he's kind of peculiar in a number of ways, and he's a little bit lighthearted and a little bit of a prankster too, going to Krishna and telling Krishna this is what's happening. Kamsa's doing this, and so to push the lila along and so on and so forth. So the classical Brahman of the Vrindavan Lila is Madhu Mangal. He's a student of Narada, but if we draw back, that's the Lila perspective, I should say. But we draw back from the Tattva perspective, then Nard is an expansion of Madhu Mangal for Leelas in Mathura and Dwarka. He may come to Vrindavan sometimes too, and Madhu Mangal is also there. But those are shorter, short visits, something like that. He's more of a, as you say, a transcendental astronaut or spaceman, right? Traveling, teaching Narada Muni, Bhajaya Vina, Radhika Rama, glorifying, broadcasting the glories of Krishna Nam. So he is most fully present and participating in the Braja Lila in Vrindavan as Madhu Mangal, who's a farce of a Brahmin. And he is constantly asserting his Brahmanhood and his adhikar and insisting that he should be treated accordingly, which everyone, especially amongst his friends, makes a joke out of, right? As an aside, this is also an example of how the Leela looks at a misunderstanding of Varnashram when unqualified Brahmins are claiming religious authority. That's another point, but yes. So Nard is there as Madhu Mangal. Madhu Mangal, Nard appears in Gaur Lila as Srivas Thakur. So some have reasons that Madhu Mangal is present in the Gaur Lila as Srivas Thakur. Some persons have posited that he's one of Madhu Mangal, one of the Dwadasa Gopals. They identify him with Kolabecha Sridhar, who was a Brahmin in Gaur Lila. But I differ with that because Madhu Mangal is not a Gopal. He's a Brahmin. Although he goes out with the Gopals, he does herds with them and so forth in many respects. He always distinguishes himself from them in their midst as a Brahmin, right? So it would be more appropriate to identifying him with Srivas Thakur, who showed Madhu Mangal Bhav in the Madhya Lila when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked Srivas Thakur to debate with Swarup Damodar. Swarup Damodar being let's say Lalita Sakhi from the Vrindavan side, and Narada from Vaikuntha, Vaidhi, which is superior. And they had a beautiful debate, and Swarup Damodar won as to the wealth of Vrindavan being superior to that of Vaikuntha, that wealth being its prem and the intimacy that affords one with Bhagwan. And when Srivas Thakur was defeated in the role of Narada, what did he do? He praised Swarup Damodar and put his hand underneath his armpit and started making a noise like this. And he exhibited the anubhavs of Madhu Mangal, prominent example. And there are other examples of Srivas Thakur also expressing some affinity for Sakya Bhava. So we look at him in this way. Srivastava is the Narada Muni, and as the Narada Muni, he must be the Madhu of Gaur Lila, who has made his courtyard a facility for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Rasa Sankirtan, which is appropriate for as service as the Priyanarma Saka, to assist Krishna as his friend and to assist Radha as her servant in their romantic life. So I'm getting a little astray from the question, but yes, we feel that Narada is fully present in the Braj Lila as Madhu Mangal, and he may come there in the form of Narada sometimes too for a brief visit. It's said that he came at Radha in sort of the oral tradition at the time of Radha's birth, right? Because she couldn't speak, couldn't open her eyes, I think the story goes. And Narada happened to appear on the scene and told, well, bring Yashoda's son here, that'll solve the problem. And when Yashoda's son, Krishna, came, then Radharani opened her eyes. And the story is that her eyes are meant only for Krishna. So Narada Muni ki jai, Madhu Mangal ki jai.
So Omkar has a
deity
sorry.
ki jai.
Okay. Omkar has a follow-up question to the first question about the dark night of the soul.
Okay.
Pranam Guru Maharaj. Jai, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering the last part of what you spoke about, the vision of Saint Teresa of Avila, I believe it was. So she had a darshan of Krishna and the gopis you mentioned. And recently I had a devotee talking to me about she having attained Madhurya-bhava, Madhurya Ras. And so I kind of took it that you meant also that, but now you mentioned that she had a darshan of, and this kind of opened up an interesting sort of thought in my mind that is it possible, and if not, what shastric reference could we go for of one outside of our Gaudiya tradition entering such a bhav without the mercy of a sadhu? That makes sense.
I think I pretty much addressed this in the first question, but first of all, I don't think that someone like Teresa, either of the Teresas or such saints, are without the blessing of sadhus. They have sadhus in their own tradition. They have a life of sadhana, prayer and practice, and so on and so forth. Not connected with Gaudiya saints per se, but they may have a darshan of Krishna. Can show himself to whomever he wants. But because you have darshan of Krishna mystically, doesn't mean necessarily that you will enter into his lila and become a gopi and attain Madhurya Rasa. That's not, those two don't correspond. He may show himself to whomever and to whatever extent. But we can't really say definitively what is the attainment of Teresa, because we don't really know much about her, really. But we do know that she's in the Catholic tradition and she's pursuing a particular ideal within Catholicism. A lot of the female mystics within Catholicism had this idea of being the bride of Christ. There's an interesting story in that connection, but it goes like this. In Poland, at some point after Poland was liberated from the Soviet oppression, the Catholic Church had a prominent influence, and I guess it still does, and it became an oppressor of Gaudiya Vaishnavism in Poland. And the Catholics tried to make Gaudiya Vaishnavism, or the Hare Krishnas, illegal, an illegal cult. And it was a court case. And one of my godbrothers was representing the devotees there. he was not a member of ISKCON. It was a sector of devotees that under the guidance of a godbrother of mine named Siddha Maharaj, but this other devotee, also a disciple of Prabhupada, was Siddhar Swarup. Anyway, he was in the court, and so when the Catholic side made the point that this Krishna that they call God has 16,108 wives, what kind of God is this? What would we think of a person that had 16,108 wives? Obviously, he's a playboy and a enjoyer. What kind of example of God is this? And we're supposed to allow this idea of God to be out and about in our streets, and that people be encouraged to enter into this, and so forth. And in the rebuttal, the devotees put a nun on the stand and asked her what her ring. Are you celibate? She said, yes. You're not married. No. What's that ring on your ring finger? The third, this finger of the left hand. And she said, well, that's my ring in marriage with Jesus. And he said, do all the nuns in your convent wear that ring? She said, yes. And how many nuns are in your particular tradition? She said, oh, there's thousands and thousands of them. He said, I rest my case. Krishna only had 16,108 queens. You got millions of them wedded to Jesus, and then we won the case. And Krishna consciousness is alive. Krishna consciousness is alive and well in Poland. So there is an idea like this within Catholicism, but look carefully at it. We see it seems to be relative to the nuns. The priests don't have an idea of becoming the wife of Bhagwan. And of course, it's a married relationship. It has nothing to do with parakiya. It has to do with swakiya in our terms, a married lila. And Bhaktisiddhanta addressed this also because he was questioned about it from scholars or maybe priests from the West. And he said the difference is that Christ in your tradition, from our perspective, is the guru as the son of God, not God. So you want to be wedded to the guru, but wedded to God, that's another thing. So he differentiated in that way. So there may be some similarities, but again, we're talking about in Gaudiya Vaishnavism and Rag, Marg, Madhurya Rasa. It's a very specific thing. That doesn't mean it's narrow. Specificity, the level and the degree and the nature of the specificity will determine the love and how one responds and so forth. So again, there are different departments in the spiritual world, different faces of God. There's no need to merge them all together because there are similarities, but to appreciate the similarities is good, and try to look at them we should look at them from that tradition's perspective, rather than try to just fit that all into our perspective. They have their own idea. The nuns who put on the ring to become the wife of Jesus, it's kind of a metaphor as far as I understand it. They don't think that there's some lila where they're going to be married to Jesus, who was he was unmarried, right? Jesus wasn't married with him. No, he had a parakia with that Mary of Magdalene or something. We don't know. So there are differences. What else?
I had a short follow-up. So is it possible though that Teresa of a something, can you hear me, Gurmanj?
Yeah.
So is it possible that she actually was a Gaudiya Vaishnava in her previous life and she just had this flash of like an old samskar in her meditation?
I would think the reverse would be more likely, that due to her sincerity and so forth, and the nature in a broad sense of her appeal, that she got reciprocation from the other side, from another department mm, because the way you're appealing doesn't apply to this department here. Mm. Therefore, that to that particular face of God, so the face of God to which it applies manifest, and gave her deep samskars for that, which would be then followed up in the next life, born as a Gaudiya Vaishnava mystic in the next life. That seems more logical, reasonable to me.
Nice. Okay, the next question is from Ananta Govinda. He's also not here today, but this is from last week. And I'll read this slow because of the Spanish translation, so bear with me. In the Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu, Rupa Goswami lists 12 rasas, direct and indirect, both direct and indirect. And he indicates that Lord Nrsimha is a representation of vatsalya ras. My understanding is that vatsalya experienced by a devotee is in the mood of a parent. But can the Lord also express parental attitude towards a devotee, where the devotee is like the child? Would that be a direct or indirect rasa? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. First of all, in Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu, there is a list of manifestations of the Godhead that are thought to preside over different rasas. Now, in positing this, Rupa Goswami has taken from the classical aesthetic writings of previous aestheticians, authors, Narada Muni, Vishwanath, and Sahitya Darpana, not Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. You have to remember, Rupa Goswami is drawn heavily from that poetic aesthetic tradition to develop what I've called a Vedanta of aesthetics, a very different way of explaining the conclusions of Vedanta than, for example, what Ramanuja has done or what Madhvacharya has done and so forth. So in some places you will find that he's just taken from there and, added that to his tradition. So to his explanation of bhakti rasa, which is, different, and otherworldly. Otherwise, his conception of rasa, as they say, is otherworldly. It's different. It's not generated out of poetry, but it's generated through sadhu sangha. But at any rate, this is one example. So when it comes to the different rasas, he has listed the deities that preside over the different rasas, and he's just taken that from Bharat or somebody earlier. And so Balaram presides over Hasya, Krishna is presiding over Madhurya, Vamanadeva is presiding over Sakya. There's a slight connection here. Vamanadeva was the friend of Indra, so to speak, right? Of sorts. The brother of Indra. The brother means friends and so forth. Nrsimhadev, Vatsalya, why they thought of that, probably because the way he treated Prahlad, right, affectionately and so forth. Now, that's as seriously as we should take all of those deities that preside over the different rasas, as mentioned in Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu. But we shouldn't think that Nrsimhadev is the object of vatsalya rasa. Prahlad did not have a vatsalya relationship with Bhagwan. His deity was actually Krishna, Govinda, who manifested as this extraordinary, never seen before form as Nrsimhadev to deal with the circumstances that his devotee was confronted with, right? At the same time, never seen before, he's eternal, right? So You have to try to put those two things together. But you know, there's like a broad sense, I guess, that Bard or whomever was drawing on to posit this idea. Now, regarding the second part of your question, typically we look at vatsalya rasa, where Krishna is the son, and the mother, the father, the nurse, the elders, and so forth are the devotees. Krishna is the object of love for parental love. So you have the parent, who's the personification or the embodiment of the love, and Krishna as the child, who's the object of love. So you're asking, is there any situation where there's a reverse of that, where Krishna or God becomes the father and the child becomes the son, and that's another form of vatsalya, if I understand your question correctly? And the answer to that is, there is a situation in which Krishna himself, for example, becomes the father and his sons become devotees. We find it in Dwarka. He said to have had many sons there with his many queens. But this is not an example of vatsalya rasa. This is a particular form of dasya rasa. Maybe Gaurava dasya, where there's respect also. There's like half a dozen or so or more different types of dasya rasa articulated by Rupa Goswami in Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu in the chapter dealing with dasya rasa. So this is one form of that. I think Gaurava means, I think it may be Gaurava dasya bhakti. I can't remember, but anyway, the sons of Krishna in Dwarka, they're his sons, he's their father. They have a relationship with him in a particular type of dasya bhakti. It's not vatsalya.
Thank you. And then there's a question from Sadhvi, and Gurumach, can you pause a little bit after the question so that Sham can translate it?
Yes.
Dandavas Guru Maharaj. So my question was about, I wondered how exactly the deities presiding over sambandha, abhidheya, and prayojana, like Govindaji, Gopinatha and Madana-mohana, how they're directly connected? Because the Goswamis were worshipping these deities and the knowledge of this came to them through these deities, or how exactly they preside over these respectful, like, departments of knowledge?
Well, I'll say a few things about that. Sometimes it's thought that if we look at the body of teachings coming from Sanatana Goswami, there's an emphasis on sambandha gyan. Whereas if we look at the teachings of Rupa Goswami, he has many books, but probably the most important and prominent books are Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu and Ujjvala Nilmani, the latter being the sequel to the former, and dealing exclusively with Madhurya Rasa, which he elaborates upon. And he has this very short chapter on that, comparatively in Bhakti-rasamrta-sindhu. So these are all about abhidheya, the way, the path. And Raghunath Goswami, who we identify with as the prayojana-tattva-acharya, his books, like Vilapa Kusumanjali and others, they deal with largely with the prayojana, and there's some emphasis on the particularly on vatsalya-bhava, and he's entering into the experience and coming out and writing about it poetically and so forth. So amongst these three acharyas, we have an emphasis in terms of their contribution, sambandha, abhidheya, and prayojana. So now Rupa Goswami's deity was Radha Govinda, he found the Radha Govinda deity. I believe there was a cow every day that was going and letting down milk in a certain place. And so he went and just dug it and found Radha Govinda there, as I understand. So a large temple was built and so forth. And Madana-mohana, the history of Madana-mohana goes back to Advaitacharya, and there's a number of stories connected with that. And Sanatana Goswami's place of bhajan, that's where the Madana-mohana temple is built. Krishna appeared to him there, and so on and so forth. So practically speaking, Sanatana Goswami is connected with Madana-mohana, and Rupa Goswami is connected with Govindaji. The case of Raghunath Goswami is a little different because he did not have Radha Gopinath as his deity or the Radha Gopinath temple. He worshipped the Govardhan Shila given to him by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Madhu Pandit was the sadhu who is in our tradition most connected with Radha Gopinath. But that said, now looking at the three deities, it's said that these three deities were originally manifested through the direction of one of Krishna's grandsons, Vajranath. And at least the story goes that when the first deity was manifest, the admirers, the sadhus, the devotees, felt that he was perfect up to the waist. So he tried again. The second deity was perfect from the waist up to the chin. And the third deity was perfect all the way up, including the face. So the legs correspond with sambandha gyan. And there's a pranam for Madan-mohan. I think it's written by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. He has asserted these are the three deities of Vrindavan. This idea is coming from did I say Krishnadas, Chaitanya Charitamrita. These ideas coming from Krishnadas Kaviraj. He posits these three deities. He gives verses glorifying them. Jayatam Surato Pango Mamamanda Matergati Matsarvas Papadam Radha Madana-mohana. So he's saying, glories to Radha Madana-mohan. I am lame and ill-advised, so I'm affected by karma and gyan. Lame refers to action. Ill-advised refers to thought. I'm afflicted by karma and gyan. I want connection with you to overcome that. And so this is a verse that we can draw, sambandha gyan from. You go to Rupa Goswami, his verse glorifying Radha Govinda, he says, Divyad Vrindaranya. What's it? Divyad Vrindaranya Kalpadruma. Kalpadruma. Shrimad Radha Govinda. Prastalivi Sevyamano Smarami. So he says, offer my respect to Radha Govinda, seated on a throne, surrounded by kalpa vriksha trees, and so forth. And he says, Sevyamano Smarami, I smarami, I meditate on them, and the Sevyamano, the special kind of service that is being rendered by the devotees to them. This is the Ragmarg type of service. So this verse is about abhidheya, the means. And then the Gopinath verse, Sri Madana-mohana Bamsi Vatatatasita Karshan Venus Vanergopir Gopinatha Shri is about attaining Gopinath, right? They're very much Madhurya Rasa perspective verses, but they correspond with the three deities, and so we see the three deities as presiding over these three aspects: sambandha, abhidheya, and prayojana. Does that help? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
So that's it for the questions today. Thank you so much for the answers, and I guess we'll continue next week.
Okay, very nice to be with all of you. Hare Krishna, Jai Gaur,
People.
Jai Ram, Jai Krishna, Jai Radhe.
Just a quick note, Chidahari is going to be speaking on the Brahma Samhita next Thursday. So same channel on Thursday at 11:30.